in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was running the programs for Target Corporation. And I became very disheartened and very frustrated because we have all these great leaders in our field doing all kinds of wonderful research and showing over and over, here's the benefits to an organization, the ROI on doing health promotion and doing wellness. And what I kept seeing over and over is the more research we kept pumping out, thinking if we just say more and say more, business leaders are going to buy into it, and that wasn't happening. And I didn't know what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt like there was a fundamental disconnect between what our research was putting out and what business leaders were listening to and paying attention to. And I started feeling like maybe worksite health promotion isn't what's working. And I felt like I was beating my head against the wall. I don't know how many of you ever felt burnt out. And I thought maybe this isn't for me. And I finished my master's in public health, and I thought, well, maybe I should go to public health. And that was a real turning point for my career. It wasn't that I learned that I don't work well in governmental agencies with the regulations, and that just wasn't my thing. But what happened for me, I think, was meant to happen. I found myself, unbeknownst to me, in a very toxic work environment. The epitome of poor leadership, poor morale, low motivation, you name it, high turnover, everything. And what was interesting about that is that here I was, a health and wellness professional, take care of myself, never get sick, teach group fitness classes, personal train, all of those things. Yet something interesting happened. 4 months into being in this environment, I didn't even know that my own wellness was being sucked out of me. And I gained about 10 to 15 pounds. I started getting migraine headaches. I was on antibiotics for sinus infections and strep throat. My husband and I were fighting. We're fine now, but I was a little nervous strain. And my friends started saying, you just don't seem like you. Is everything okay? And I have this light bulb moment. In coaching, we call it an aha moment sometimes, right? That I said, well, no wonder why what we're doing isn't working. Because you know what? When we spend all these hours at work, if people are not playing to their strengths, if they don't like what they're doing, if they have poor leadership, if their coworkers aren't supporting them, the list goes on, you're not going to get them to care about nutrition, about physical activity, about stress management, and no incentive in the planet is going to make them care. And I sat there and said, I actually cared intrinsically. I cared about my well-being, and I didn't even know it was being sucked out of me. And so I said, well, now what am I going to do with this? And so I called up my husband and said, oh, I got to go back to school. And so I decided to focus my studies specifically in organizational management because I wanted to look at more of this culture stuff, and I wanted to get outside the literature that we're so used to being in. And I was used to all the behavior change theories, but I thought there's got to be more out there. And at the end of the day, you're talking to businesses, and businesses make business decisions. So that's kind of where I want to talk a little bit about this phrase, a culture of health. Because I think over the last year and a half, this has become a really popular buzz phrase. Oh, yeah, we have a culture of wellness, a culture of health. And that's fine and dandy, but I think we misuse that phrase a lot. We don't really understand what culture is. And I hear a lot of companies say, yeah, we have a culture of health, and then they start listing a laundry list of, well, we have healthy eating policies, we have, walkways, we have exercise classes. They start listing all the things that they do, or the environmental things that they have going on, or the policies they have in place, as if that makes up a culture. Now, that's part of environment and part of climate, and that's an important part of culture, but that's not culture. The culture itself is something that almost feels intangible, yet we know there's tools where we can measure it. And that's that underlying belief, values, the stuff that's kind of the underlying currents of the organization. So when we talk about culture, do people in your organization actually fundamentally believe that their health and well-being matters? Do they actually believe that the organization cares about them? So people can go through the motions, but they don't have it underlying, yep, it's a norm, they value it. And what I'm interested in is how do we get at that? Because a lot of the research out there shows profound impact of cultures when we're looking at it from this broaden our lens, and perhaps we've been a little too narrowly focused, and we keep trying harder rather than working smarter. I work with a lot of companies that say, we want to have a culture where we're a great place to work, or they have these values on the wall that say our employees are a great asset. But it's just words. This is the underlying culture. You can say that we have all this great stuff, but the employees know better. You're right. The employees are going to sit there, and I'll use David Honeycutt for a minute. He talks about positioning health and wellness as something that we do with employees and for employees, not to them. And so a litmus test that I like to use with the clients I work with is I say, okay, Your CEO was to stand up tomorrow in front of your employees and say something like this. You know, employees, we value you simply because you're human and you're alive and you exist, and therefore you matter to us. First and foremost. Secondly, you matter to us as employees of this company. And you matter to us whether you are on the clock or off the clock, whether you're in these walls or outside of these walls. And whether you've worked for us for a year or 40 years, you matter. And because you matter, we know that your health and well-being is important for what you want out of life and your quality of life, whatever that looks like for you. It's a very personal thing. And we want to support you in that. And so because of that, we're launching a new benefit of employment that we want you to be a part of creating. So this is for you. If your employees would sit there and get excited and go, wow, this is cool, consider that that's a good place to be, and that health and wellness is a natural extension of a culture that already exists and has a good foundation. But if your employees would be sitting there with their arms crossed going, yeah, right, I say consider you have work to do, and that may alter your plans of how you go about doing this. It doesn't mean we don't still do health and wellness, but we might look at it. But I think what's missing, and what we kind of tiptoe around or haven't really got our hands on in our field, is this engagement piece. And there is so much research that's going on out there all the time on engagement. Gallup is the leading organization on it, but there's other organizations that have looked at this too, and I'm going to touch on some of this in a moment. But that when companies have more engaged employees, you see over and over that they have less turnover, that there's more productivity, that their customers and clients they work with have better customer satisfaction ratings, there's more innovation. And you think about in times like these, we need to be, more than innovative. We need to out-service our competitors. We need people that are going to be like that. But engagement's not telling people what to do. So when we define engagement, basically we have people who are engaged, they're in it, they're present, they're loving what they're doing, they're giving their all. And then you kind of have the walking, sleeping, the not engaged. They're just kind of checked out, they're going through the motions. And then you have the disengaged, and the disengaged are the cancers that spread, because the disengaged will actually try to be counterproductive to the people who are engaged, right? They're trying to take them down. So it costs a lot of money, and actually it costs over $300 billion annually to have disengaged employees. So Gallup has done so much research, and their latest book that they put all this into is the Q12 book, and they have an assessment tool that they look at this. But what they're finding is that engagement occurs when these things happen. Employees know what's expected of them. They feel valued, and that's really, really critical. They feel valued. They also have someone at work they feel cares about them, either a boss or a coworker. So again, kind of go back to this connectedness at work and those quality relationships. And they get to do what they do best every day. They get to leverage their strengths. We may say, well, this is bigger than health promotion. Well, not necessarily, because a lot of what we can do if we broaden our perspective and rethink of how we go about services and programs and strategies, we can tap into this stuff and better align with the organization so it's not separate, but it becomes part of who the organization is. I see over and over and over, somewhere between year 2 and 4, maybe it's 3, maybe they can get up to 5 years, but somewhere in that mark they say, we're doing it, we're doing wellness, we feel good about it, but we just feel like it's lost that oomph and employees are just going through the motions. And they have it tied to the benefit plan, and they're doing all the stuff that they're supposed to be doing, and they're getting 90% participation. But participation and engagement are not the same thing. And so we go in and we do a survey. We do a culture survey, and we're actually looking at what makes employees tick, and we're asking questions about what's important to them, what their motivators are, what their barriers are. Not checking a list, are you interested, but we're trying to get at their values and what makes them tick. And you know what we find over and over? Employees will unload and say, I feel like this is stupid. I feel like I'm forced to do this. I feel like I'm jumping through hoops just to get this reduced insurance. Can't we do something else? And again, they're getting compliance. They're raving about their participation rate. But if you haven't asked some data to get some qualitative data to find what's going on, you may find that underneath the surface you've got something kind of not so great brewing that needs to be tended to.